All right, this is user, listener, viewer, whatever's the right term, generated content. Personally, some of my favorite stuff. This is from Heidi H. She says, first of all, love this podcast. First of all, if you don't start with something like that, we're not going to read your question. Okay?
No, definitely not. You got to grease the wheels a little bit.
We're
you want to make it onto the show.
So,
the compliment has to start.
The old compliment sandwich. Love the podcast. Nuggets of wisdom in everyone. Appreciate it. I have a question. Not sure if you've covered this in a different episode because I'm only halfway through the catalog. I'm on VNR number 37 about scaling. First of all, that's really cool. Started from the beginning and just making our way through. Okay. I have always understood the workout prescription, RX version, should cover 3 key elements: the work required, aka the reps, the weight and or movement, and the time. Also fully appreciate that workouts of the day can fall into 2 main categories, basically for time or work. However, shouldn't the quote-unquote stimulus envisioned by the programmer be all-encompassing? How important is it for the coaches to understand what the programmer expects from the workout as written, addressing all 3 of these elements? Then they can relate it to scaling. For example, as a coach, if I understand the complete stimulus, I feel more confident recommending our more experienced athletes scale up, not just down, to achieve the stimulus. What are your thoughts on this? And do you ever think it's appropriate to scale up? So there's several facets in there, if you will. Where would you like to start? I've got a couple of things written down here, but go ahead.
Well, I'll start with saying I think, first of all, her assessment is very accurate as far as what you have, like the big knobs to change, so to speak. I think the movements, the time frame, the overall volume, the difficulty of those movements via either load or the challenge that they present, I think those are kind of the big buckets that you're going to be considering. I don't think that intended stimulus has to be this mystical thing that goes beyond that significantly. And I'll kind of offer two big thoughts to kick off the conversation. The first being that I don't know that you can accurately predict perfectly any intended stimulus, because ultimately the people performing what it is that you've written are going to dictate that to some degree. And a perfect example, if you look historically over the workout, Fran, I think the intended stimulus broadly was short, relatively sprint-esque kind of pace, not too broken up, not too heavy. You can keep moving even when you don't want to. That's broadly the stimulus. Now, at the time that Fran was first introduced, was the expectation a sub-3 effort? Probably not, because most people at that time were not exposed to this kind of fitness, and there was no way that that was going to be happening. So if you are trying to work backwards from a dictated outcome, it's going to be very, very, very hard to know that. Now, you fast forward to the modern day of CrossFit, and there's a lot more data points. We have so many workouts being done by so many people. You have a pretty good sense of how things are going to shake out. But at the end of the day, I think it bears the question, how precise do you have to be to get the utility out of the tool? And the tool is, I need it close enough so that I can make some decisions for other people that are going to be engaging with it, in my opinion. So those are the 2 thoughts. Like, number 1, how precise do you have to be? And then number 2, how much does it really matter outside of the broad utility of I've got to get close when I'm talking about scaling or new athletes, et cetera?
Yeah, close enough for many things will get you there. Yep. And yes, you could have Fran, which is funny. Of course, it's like the most well-known CrossFit work, but it's one I wrote down as well. That you could have Fran done in a class of varying skill levels and capacities, and you could have the same workout, let's say, be done by people and have it take them anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes, which if you're looking just mathematically, it's a huge difference in time. Like, by multiples of what 3 is, 10 is almost, 300% more than it. That's a huge difference. But if done appropriately and scaled appropriately, and they're all doing it in 10 minutes or less, they could all meet the needs of what they do that day. Again, generally speaking, because I agree, Fran as intended, or if you were the coach, short and sharp is basically what Fran is going to be envisioned for most people in that class. And if you have somebody slogging away in Fran 18 minutes later, there's a good chance that if you ever can say that they did miss a stimulus, they potentially did, something like that. But that's also not to say, and here goes rabbit hole number 1001, right? that even if they wildly missed the stimulus, does that mean it was just your training day is trash? It's like, well, no, absolutely not. If somebody did just really slow thrusters, they broke them up a ton, they never lost their form mechanics, they were always safe, and they just took big rest periods, and they almost made it into like a thruster strength day, doing a triple. I rested a minute. I did a triple. I rested a minute. Okay, you're way off of what Fran is for most people. But what you did walk out of the gym that day doing is a whole lot of a wonderful functional movements, and you never exceeded your, safe capacity, and you got in one heck of a workout. I'm here to tell you, we'll make some adjustments the next time you walk in, most likely, but not a training day, but you did miss the intended stimulus of short and sharp, but you did a bunch of thrusters and a bunch of pull-ups, and you're going to be good to go. But
well, and let me piggyback on that, because I completely agree, and that's why I think it's dangerous to get too precise with the quote unintended stimulus, because you're going to start to put all sorts of value judgments on the outcome if it's not mirroring that. And so, to your example, I have somebody comes in, Fran's on the board, we expect a 3-minute effort, roughly, let's say 3 to 5. Let's be generous, right? And their effort was 10 minutes, but that workout in particular hits them right in the weakness. They're not very good at pull-ups. They have a hard time with thrusters, and they got 10 solid minutes in there of practice on those two movements, and they completed the effort. And let's think about their training history on top of that. Perhaps in the past, they haven't been able to complete Fran at all with that weight and those movements. I mean, that's a humongous win, even though it didn't hit the quote-unquote intended stimulus. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that you can't just limit the value of something to what was originally intended for the day. There's plenty of good things to be had from a training session that doesn't mirror your exact expectations going in, and I think that's really important. One thing I want to circle back to is, I'll maybe defer this to the end, but I guess my question is, does it matter, that I posed earlier? And I've got a list of like, yes, if. It matters if. And maybe that is something that might be more useful in this instance, is if we can define kind of the boundaries of when it's not appropriate, when you did miss the mark. Well, maybe that's something useful.
I could give you an eeasy miss the mark right now and then go back to the Fran thing, or vice versa. Missing the mark would be that the workout of the day is JT, handstand push-ups, ring dips, and push-ups. You don't have handstand push-ups, so you do a 10K run. It's like,
yeah.
Okay, well, the intended stimulus was pressing in various directions with a ton of interference. And now you didn't press in any way, shape, or form with no interference, and you went for a long run. Well, first of all, no CrossFitter is going to go for a 10K run. So we know that that's a fictitious story right from the get-go. But that, sure, you can wildly miss the mark of intended stimulus. You're like, well, you can't do that, so we're going to just throw it out. Because you know what? It was a random workout anyway, so who cares? Let's replace it with another random workout. Well, if you're doing random nonsense, okay, you might be onto something. But if you are following some sort of an actual plan as to when you went below parallel, when you went overhead, when you pressed, when you pulled, when you went heavy, when you whatever, well, then it can make sense for the best of your ability, to understand what that intended stimulus was, and let's find a way to have your ability level meet where that is within the confines of sanity, your capacity, the gear available, the time we have, and all of that. What I was going to say is, I think on the Fran thing is, somebody took just a really long time for Fran, and I don't want to say that. Here, how do I want to do this? Let's say your example of, we're going to try to have most people finish Fran in 3 to 5 minutes. Let's just say that, okay? Make it in some way. And somebody is like, you know what? We've done Fran twice this year. Imagine that. And I scaled it or did banded pull-ups or did whatever. And I hit that mark. I was right in around 5 minutes each time. It was a legs and lungs burner. And it left me just looking at the ceiling. Great. Hey, but you know what? I didn't really have any pull-up capacity then, or not. It wasn't that great. My pull-up capacity has come a decent way. And you know what? I think I can get all 45 today. I think I'm going to totally miss the mark on what you're telling me for the time domain, but I think I can get it. I don't have any drama with that person doing that in any way, shape, or form, because what that person's going to do by even this day, missing the short and sharp aspect of Fran, right? And taking big chunks of rest between their pull-ups because they need to recover a bit, it's not only going to be good for their psyche and being one heck of a feeling of accomplishment if today's the day they actually did 45 pull-ups in the workout. But if pull-ups are what they struggle with, well, then pull-ups are what they need to do. Well, then if you're not allowing them to do the thing that they need to do, when the heck are they going to do it? So every now and then, let's let them do the thing.
To add a layer to that, when are they going to do it under conditions of fatigue and other challenge, which is something I think people miss the mark on all the time. Because the obvious rebuttal to that would be like, well, Pat, that's when they would, do extra sets of pull-ups in a slow, controlled environment off the clock. It's like, okay, that's cool. And there's totally utility to that to a certain degree. However, conditions matter, and it is important that if you are somebody who's building up your pull-up capacity, you face that type of challenge where you want to have that capacity. That's really important. So you have to attack it from different angles, and you have to be allowed to attack it from different angles. So so what I really liked about your example with JT and the 10K was like, okay, yes, you can get it so far off track that it's clearly not at all the quote unquote intended stimulus. Absolutely you can. I guess and I think that's a really good reframing, because it's like, okay, there's obviously an outer edge here. And if you're arguing the difference between a 4-minute or a 6-minute finish time, it's like, I think you're in a ballpark where you're totally good to go, even if it's not quote perfect. The other things I want to add to that list that's like, all right, this is kind of where you have missed the mark, or does it matter? Yes, if you have somebody who absolutely can't finish what you've put on the board. So we go back to that Fran example, and you have somebody who you're going to kind of let loose on the workout, and 10 minutes have passed and they're not even out of the second round. It's like, okay, now I think we're in a territory where you probably haven't done enough to get them close to where we want to be. So I can't finish. That's a big one. Second one, obvious, is that if your movement quality degrades to the point that it's no longer valuable to keep going, you probably missed the mark. So again, 95-pound thruster, keep the example in the Fran universe. You have somebody who's trucking through that, and they have to break up the set a bunch. That on its own is probably not a red flag, but along with that breaking up of the set, there's some really, really severe breakdown in technique. It's looking just terrible. The way that they're moving under that barbell is just, it's not productive anymore. You missed the mark. So that's a big, obvious red flag.
And I simplify that to, in general, don't do it faster than you can do it properly.
Right. Sure. Yeah. And then the third one I kind of had on that list was, this one may be a little harder to catch in the moment, but just a consideration about total volume. And again, that's one where you may have somebody who finishes in the time that you had set out. You may have somebody who looks pretty good doing it, but it's a big stretch for them to have done that amount of work. It's a big leap from where they've been in the past. And next thing you know, you don't see them for 4 or 5 days because they are so sore that they just couldn't conceive of coming back for another training session. You missed the mark if that's the case. So that's one that's a little harder to detect in the moment, but you have to keep an eye on to some degree is, okay, is this volume appropriate for this person at this time?
We touched on that in a previous episode where I was very honest where, and that could be a difference between, Heidi mentioned in her question, or, there's different types of workouts. You could classify them as task priority or time priority. Well, we mentioned in a previous podcast, the workout McGee, Hero Workout McGee, 30-minute AMRAPs, got heavy deads, push-ups, and box jumps in there. And I do not get the true number of rounds that I'm potentially able to get in McGee because I know what it will do to my body. That I get to a certain point and I stop. And that's it. And so that's like, I know past a certain amount of volume, I'm not doing myself any favors. And now, I threw our good friend Joe Alexander under the bus in the previous podcast. So I'm going to throw Mo under the bus today. There was, Mo's one of the owners of BTWB. And I was chatting with him, and he popped into a local gym in his area. And as we record this, it's December 14th. And they were doing a 12 days of Christmas workout, which, some of those can just be
brutal. Absolutely brutal.
And take forever. And the volume adds up. And God bless me, said he walked up to the trainer, like, is it just getting ready to do it? And Mo was like, hey, man, just so you know, wherever we are at 30 minutes, I'm done.
He's like, smart man.
Yeah. He's like, just so you know, just I don't really need anything beyond that. I got stuff to do. I can't be bedridden. So at 30 minutes, I'm out. It's like,
what's that?
I was like,
it's like
good.
that the Ron Swanson approach, right? He's like, I know what I'm about, son.
Yeah. And it's like, past a certain amount, it's like, I got in plenty. Yep. I didn't finish the workout. It was prescribed to go a bit longer. But you can make that call. And now he made that as an individual aware of his own capacity. That might be tougher to do as a coach, but hopefully you're intimately familiar with the group that you're training, and you can help make some decisions. It's like, hey, this is what we got going on today. Just so you know, Tom's got that fire in the gut. He's going to want to go the whole way. Tom, I'm here to tell you that's a bad decision, my friend. So we're going to go ahead, trust me on this one, rein in it a little bit. So the volume thing, I agree with. That can be it as well.
And to keep going on that a little bit, just for practical tips for people that are working with people, coaching, etc. One of the biggest volume traps in the world is somebody that hasn't been around in a while, but is relatively fit. That is like red flag number one. This person has the capacity to do more today than is appropriate because they haven't been in the game, so to speak. Guaranteed they're going to push past the threshold that's right for that day, and they're going to end up a little beat up. So watch out for that, and ask me how I know.
Right? Yeah,
I think we've all been there, and I was there recently. I did Mary. I haven't been doing high rep pull-ups in a long time.
Sets of 15 pull-ups.
Yep. And I'll tell you, I even put a governor on it, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do a round every 2 minutes. That's what's appropriate for me on this effort. Any more than that is just cruising for a bruising. And I was still wrecked from that. So there you go.
I believe it. And getting back to Heidi's question, especially like we said, the JT versus the 10K example and things like that. Like, in my humble opinion anyway, Heidi, if you've got somebody that's programming for you, if you're writing the workouts or whatnot, that intended stimulus and the why, it should be there, and somebody should be able to articulate to you what it is. And if they can't, I would find that confusing and troubling. And I can see how it would be very helpful as a trainer to know that, and that's why it should be articulated. So, for example, I was coming up with some workouts the other day for the future, and one of them, not to have anybody have a potential heart attack, because you got to go long every now and then. It's a 30-minute AMRAP that's looming in somebody's future, and it had in it some time on the air bike, rope climbs, I believe, and then a heavy push press. Okay, so we have 3 elements there. Now, if I was talking to the trainers and talking about the intended stimulus, there's 3 elements there. I put all 3 there for a reason, but I really built the workout around the heavy push press. Like, that was the thing I really wanted to get in that day, and I wanted to get in some sets of 8 and things like that, and figured out over the course of the AMRAP how much time somebody would spend on the bike, the rope, and then when they would get back to the barbell, and so how many rounds to potentially get in a 30-minute window, so how many sets of 8 would this, an average athlete do, and so all of that was there. And if somebody didn't know that, and that the push press and the heavy, and a bit on the heavy side, by the way, was what was intended, and that's why there would be a decent amount of time before you touched the barbell again. You wouldn't be touching the barbell every 20 seconds. Yep. That could be lost on somebody. They might see and go like, oh, it's a 30-minute workout. We're supposed to go long today. I'm just going to swap out that, and we're just going light and long today. It's like, that's not really based upon where we've been, what the goal was. And so that would be really helpful for somebody to know. And then you could even further have the conversation with the coach if they're making scaling and modification decisions. And it's like, all our bikes are taken. It's like, okay, cool. If you're then asking me personally, do what you got to do to run the class, logistics, and maybe there's a foot of snow on the ground outside. But if in my best case scenario, I would say, well, don't hop on the rower. Please go substitute that bike with a run. That way I'm not pulling the whole time on the rower to get off and do the rope climb. and then the hip drive. And I would rather just have you run. That's why I put the bike in there, so the rower. So like these things should be able to be explained, and then you would just go down that checklist of trying to make the best, closest decision you can to replicate that stimulus based upon, again, athlete ability level, time you have available, equipment. Is there 2 feet of snow on the ground? Hey, you know what? All the bikes are taken. I would love to have you run. Congratulations, you're going to have some extra interference to your rowing. You'll be fine. Fitness will still be achieved, but I understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. That could be very good.
And as an extension, a kind of a hierarchy of choice. I think that's a really good way to put it there. Is like, hey, at the end of the day, if that's what you end up with, it's not the end of the world, but there were some better choices along the way. I think that's an excellent point. And, so from a practical standpoint, I agree with everything you just said there, that, you have to have a really good understanding of what you're looking for, even if that's not a perfect one-for-one match when you have to change it. And so some big things that I think about when I'm talking intended stimulus and therefore decisions around scaling, et cetera. Time frame is the obvious one. It's like, hey, how long is this roughly going to be? And I think we killed it already that, it doesn't have to be so precise, but ballpark, right?
Right. It's not a rigid boundary. There's soft parameters.
Yep. And then, you kind of clued me into a few of these things where you were just speaking around, but load is another obvious one. But load, I think, sometimes gets just kind of lumped into heavy, medium, light, when really you can expand this to just consider the difficulty of the movement, regardless of whether it's weightlifting or not. And your rope climb example is a great a choice there, because it's like, all right, one rope climb is a demanding effort, and you have to give that repetition a little bit more weight than something like, let's say, a burpee. Burpee, you're going to be able to crank out 5 or 10 of them in the time it takes, and the time and effort it takes you to do like a single rope climb for, let's say, the average person. And so you have to kind of consider it that way. All right, how much effort is required for this set? And by extension, what do I expect the breaks to be across this set, if any? And then by extension, what do I expect the cadence from that exercise to the next exercise to be? And so, for example, if you had a 30-minute effort like you were just describing, and the movements were something like burpees, double unders, bike, well, it's a pretty good bet that the effort throughout that 30 minutes is going to be relatively sustained. Obviously, you're going to trip up once in a while. Obviously, you're going to have a couple of thoughts about why you're there and what you're doing with your life before you start that 10th set of burpees. But nothing is so brutal about each one of those that you can't just pick up and keep it going. Contrast that with a bike, heavy push press, and rope climb. Well, the sets are probably going to start to get broken up at some point because it's heavy enough to dictate that. And, the transition time between exercises is going to start to slow down a little bit because of the nature of each one of them. And that's expected. So that's just another kind of filter that you can look through when you're making a decision about scaling options.
And to touch on that 30-minute AMRAP one again, even now the next layer to that, if I was having the conversation with the coaches, and I didn't mention this, but it's just one rope climb, and that one rope climb each time, where it might not seem like that much. You're like, well, I'm going to have this chunk of time on the bike that takes a few minutes, and one rope climb, and instead of 8 heavy push press. That one rope climb is going to be legless, started from a seated position on the floor. So now that's why it's one rope climb and not more. And that's why I want to have you on the bike for at least a couple of minutes. And I would tell them, hey, this is actually one of those workouts. I tell people all the time, give the run and the monostructural component the respect it deserves. Don't use it as a recovery to be a barbell hero on Nancy. Like, push the pace on the run too. But on a workout like this, where as demanding as that gymnastics movement's going to be, and I want a slight heavy bias to the push press, that if you sell your soul on the bike, well, all you're going to do is get off and stand staring at the rope for 90 seconds before you begin the climb. So I would actually use that bike as an active kind of recovery part, so when you get off, we can get going on that rope, hit that heavy push press, get back on the bike, and now that's my kind of almost like you should do on a heavy day where I would ideally want somebody to take 2 to 4 minutes rest. Well, I'm going to sneakily, if that's the word, put that into this workout so that you're actually taking the rest that you should and just going at a moderate pace on the bike so you can really give a good effort on these other two. So hopefully whoever's programming your workouts could, articulate these whys, and then you're like, gotcha. Okay, that helps me make better decisions for the group,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say that, that's a big responsibility, in my opinion, of trainers, is to be able to discern that on their own. Like it's great if you have somebody who's doing the programming and they can provide that and give those guidelines. Awesome. I think that's totally appropriate. If they don't, I think that's why it's so important that trainers practice what they preach.
100%.
Because with more experience, even if you're not the top dog athlete in the gym, if you've been exposed to enough stuff, you'll have a pretty good sense inherently of like, okay, this is how this is going to map out when we actually get the rubber to the road and start doing this thing. So really, really important that you have that hands-on experience. This is really difficult to gain any other way. And I think that's why, in many cases, when you really start analyzing CrossFit as a program, there's some very easy objective points to be made, but there is so much experiential knowledge to be earned by just staying in the game. I think that's a really huge part of it. And it can't just be, Greg used to talk about it all the time, how it's, there's absolutely a scientific bent to it, and the underpinnings of it are sound. But there is an art on the other end of that, and that's the part where you're kind of pushing boundaries and experimenting a little bit, and as it should be. So be open to that.
And and hopefully with scaling and modification, this goes without saying, but I'll just say it so it's said, people's version of a workout, especially a more challenging one, where if it's challenging because of loading or because of the technical complexity of the movement, well, that by its very nature is probably going to have to require more modifications in a larger group of people, that they're all still doing the same workout. Okay, so for example, back to the JT workout, which is my personal nightmare. Like if hell exists and I'm greeted there at the door by the devil, and he'll say, come on in and get warmed up for JT. And that's kind of how it'll go. And so if you've got somebody doing a prescribed JT, handstand push-ups, let's say they're amazing, strict, unbroken, they're just a be the deficit, they're amazing, right? And that they got the ring dips and the push-ups are flawless. And then you've got somebody over there that they're doing a shoulder press, a light shoulder press instead of the handstand push-ups. They don't have ring dips yet, so they are doing dips off of a box or off of a bench, and their feet are on the floor, giving them as much or as little assistance as is needed. And their push-ups are still a work in progress. So they're either elevated push-ups or the knee push-ups, or they start off as regular, then they hit fatigue, they go to knee or elevated, whatever. They even change the workout midstream like that. We're all doing JT. Every one of those athletes and everyone in between is in their way exactly what this show is about, preserving the stimulus of pressing in various directions with a tremendous amount of interference. Life's good. You're all good. So it's that's the point. One big happy family in the class kind of marching forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, you're jogging some memories from JT. I remember doing that workout in the early days in my apartment in San Francisco on Christmas Eve. I have a vivid memory of doing that. And this probably had to be, 2006 or 2007. So yeah, it's a good one. If you've never pulled that one out of the case, it's a good one. And I feel like you don't see that many workouts that kind of are programmed specifically with that kind of stamina bent in mind. Like, you are not breathing heavy by the time you finish JT. At least you got to be a freak show if that's the case, meaning, you're so good at those pressing movements that you can actually get significantly out of breath. That's a feat. For most of us, it's
hardest push-ups you'll ever do.
Absolutely. It's brutal, but it's a good one.
Potentially, unless I'm missing something, let me know. We might be at the later part of Heidi's question about when is it appropriate to scale not just down, but to scale up.
This is Pat's favorite topic. I'm glad that we got here.
As I said before, look, let's just say it. The RX workout is for chumps. If you want to really get fit, you better scale that up. We're talking RX, right. Not even RX plus, RX plus.
I agree. And you got to own it too. As soon as you're done, you got to walk to the whiteboard in front of everybody else, put that plus next to your name. I mean,
I put the plus in a different color.
Yeah, for sure. Circle it too.
All right. So I guess, it's a fair question, right? is there a time to scale up? There you've got the and I don't have Heidi here talking to her directly, but from what I believe that she's coaching or running what I would consider just a normal traditional class. Shouldn't say anything about competitors class, nothing like that. So I'm assuming your regular swath of society doing what we would consider a reasonably and well-programmed CrossFit workout. Now the question is, if and when, how often, should I make that call to scale up for my people?
If I'm answering the question directly, I would say the answer is yes. However, it is very rare. Rarely is it the case that somebody legitimately needs to be, quote, scaled up. I think that if you have kind of two different scenarios here, you have the general program for the general population at your gym that you're doing. It's going to be a matter of, hey, when it comes time to lift heavy, you are putting more weight on the bar. That's kind of self-selecting based on your ability.
Right.
And when it comes time to do the workout like Fran or Cindy, the scale up is, cool story, bro. You finished in 4 minutes last time. No, you don't need a heavier barbell, or you don't need to do bar muscle ups in this particular workout. You need to aim for a 3-minute time or a 3:30 time. That's your scale up, is the expectation on performance goes up a little bit. And that covers the vast majority, in my opinion. Now, if you have a group that is like really, really fit, we're talking competitive, this is like what they're investing all their time in, etc. My argument still kind of stands as far as I don't think it's categorically scaling up, but I do think that the programming overall takes a bit of a different slant. And I think that's slightly different because you've considered a different athlete. It's not that you are looking at these workouts like, again, let's take a classic like a Cindy and saying, oh, that's too easy. You might be saying, you know what, at this stage of the game, an athlete that's going to do Cindy and attempt a PR, that volume is a little bit too much for what I have planned around it, because I know that they have a freakish capacity to just put themselves in a hole. So I'm going to modify that by making a slightly different selection. Or there's a skill that I know that they need work on more than they need work on their run-of-the-mill pull-up. So maybe I choose to include it that way. But it's less of a scale-up with the framing of this is no longer challenging or has utility, but it's just not appropriate for the totality of what they're doing in that specific moment, if that makes sense.
It does. And as a steeped in old-timey CrossFit tradition CrossFitter myself, I'm I don't want to sit here and just agree with you because that's boring for the listeners, although I do, but I, but I do, the truth is, if I was answering Heidi's question, face to face, like you said, unless I'm missing something, for the overwhelming majority of people that are going to do a well-programmed workout of the day, I can count on one hand the number of times that it didn't serve the population really well, because, again, doing things as quickly as you can do them well, for most people, that intensity piece can always be just ratcheted up just a hair more. I had a profoundly capable individual in my community that recently, they got like a killer Helen time. I could say what it is right now. I can't remember, so I'm not going to do it justice, but it was a very, in the 90th percentile, it was a very, very fast Helen. And their legitimate question was like, look, here I am. I've arrived. I'm look at this, about the pinnacle of Helen. So I'm thinking, and Helen came up again, because last time they did it in the 90th percentile. I'm thinking this time of scaling it up. I'm thinking I'm going to do chest to bar pull-ups. I'm going to swing the heavier bell. And I was like, fine. You're still, what a great workout. You're not going to be shortchanged, that's for sure. But we, broke down their previous Helen, and let's say that, of course, they did it unbroken at that level, but let's say that their 400-meter runs were a minute 45, let's say, per 400 or something like that. And I was like, I encourage you this time to see if you can keep each one just below 140. And they were like, oh, I thought that's what you were going to say. That really sucks. I really was hoping that you were going to say, cool, hit the chest to bar pull-ups and the 70-pound bell. And again, it wouldn't have been wrong.
No,
but not a bad outcome. And not a bad outcome. They're going to be plenty fit. They're going to be amazing. But even for that person who, has a blazing fast Helen time, they don't need this. They don't need the heavier bell. And my fastest, athletes, if it's a 10 by 100 meter sprint day, I'm not going to have my fastest athletes run 110 meters. Like, they're just going to run that distance faster.
Or do 15 sets, right? Like there's no utility in that. Well, not no utility, but it's not going to yield a better outcome just because there's more.
And I would even say, again, I'm not talking about competitive athletes. You touched on that. Great. I'm not going there. I'm talking regular folks working out. So let's say that even it's something like a workout like Grace, which is a fantastic, awesome, another short and sharp intended stimulus, Fran-ish workout. And maybe you've got somebody who is a beast, and that's wheelhouse. They're not only strong, they're fit, they're the whole package, and they're going to be able to do Grace in around 2 minutes, like a killer time. And it's not, and don't worry, get me wrong, like they're going to feel it because they did a 2-minute Grace, but they're not devastated. And 10 minutes later, if they wanted to, they could probably do something else. So, okay, did it not hit them hard enough? Should I have made it 155 instead of 135, or should I have bumped up the reps and all that? And this is the interesting thing, maybe, of art versus science, right? You could have them do 30 at 155. It wouldn't be wrong or bad, and their life would be fine. Their fitness would be great. But if now we're taking, I would say, more of a global step back away from just today's workout, and we look at the week's training and the month's training and the year's training, and just like we vary our time domains and loadings and rep ranges, and we also should vary our intensity as well, where every day we're just not burning it down. Well, this individual, allowing them to have this day where they went pretty darn hard, I don't have to just bury their soul in the backyard every day. Like them going really darn hard, they get their hands on their hips and walking around like, whew, that was a stinger. I was right around my old PR. That's great. Fantastic. They can go home. They can go home and not need to do anything else. And doing that by not having every day have to be like, I'm going to scale up so that you're going to feel it like you've never felt it before. Well, that's not necessary. In the grand scheme of the oscillations of everything else that we do, those days have value. And don't get me wrong, if you're doing well-rounded training with variance, they're going to get that tail on fire somewhere else. Because if that barbell happened to be their wheelhouse and it's just, it was hard, but not crazy hard like it would be for a normal human like me. Well, with variance, because you're not always just doing short barbell workouts, they're gonna get their due on some other day, and that's a good thing. And so I overwhelmingly don't see the need, if you're doing good solid programming, to scale up, unless it's kind of like we used to say, Greg used to say, the old level ones or whatnot, that you, and this of course we could dissect as well, that you program for the best and scale for the rest. And when that saying was created, there was something like a Fran or a Helen or a Diane or Cindy was plenty. It wasn't, well, now I see what Rich Froning and Matt Fraser are doing. So now if I'm programming for the best and I'm going to scale for the rest, everything is going to be games level, because now I have to program for the best. So every workout's going to look like a games event, because those are the best, and I program for the best, and I scale for the rest. No, that's agreed. Not what that phrase was intended to mean. And if that's creeping into someone's head, I think it's polluted the original message for the general population.
Yeah, I got a lot to add to that. I think a high average is what you kind of want to keep in mind for your quote best. Not the tippy top of the mountain, not the Chris Spielers of the world or the Rich Fronings of the world, but like a high average, I think is a really good center point for most programming applications, especially if you're dealing with a wide population. Second, to expand on something that you brought up that I think is really, really important, is if you are looking to challenge somebody and you think that they are, quote, ready to scale up, unquote, look for some different ways to challenge them within what's already there. And that was one of my favorite coaching applications when I was working at an affiliate and working with clients more directly. Those were some of the most fun things to do. And you gave a couple of great examples there. You're like, okay, we got Helen. This guy's a stud at Helen. Cool. we are going to take an approach that may result in a slower overall time, but is going to challenge an element of it that he doesn't want to do or isn't as good at. And he's kind of masking that with the strategy he chooses to employ for the workout. So no, the win on today is not changing anything, but your approach has to change radically. If you drop below a 130 pace on your run, you lose. That's the challenge of the day. But coach, I might have to rest a little bit between my set and my overall time suffers. Okay, you scaled it up because the effort was so much different. Your grace example was a beautiful, beautiful, pure example of that. Let's say you have somebody with let's just call it a 3-minute grace, Certainly not the craziest time ever, but like that's a solid grace time.
Yeah.
To get that solid grace time, let's say this individual chooses the strategy of, fast singles. It's a single rep, drop, take a step, single rep, etc., and they get 30 that way. Okay.
Popular
the challenge
strategy.
the challenge today is, can you hold that same time, but no less than a set of 5? Or different yet, 1 set, get as many as you can, and then when you have to break, you can do whatever you want after that, but you have to give it 1 solid, continuous set, see how far you can go.
That's great, yes.
And if you blow up and your time is longer, that's not the point. The point was you chose a different approach, which was more challenging to you, because otherwise you would have chosen it in the first place. And that is working on a different skill set than what your chosen strategy was previously. And that's got a ton of value in it, even if it's not as obvious when you look at the outcome on paper from effort A to effort B. So that's something to really consider is, hey, what do I have to play with that I haven't considered yet without changing a thing? Once you've gone through that, I think there is a second step that can be appropriate to say, okay, maybe it is time to ratchet something up. Rare, but it's really rare. Let's make sure we're clear there. If and when you choose to do that, I think you have to be really, really thoughtful about which variable you choose to change and don't go whole hog. So for example, let's go back to Fran. Real world example. You have somebody, they got an amazing Fran time. It's like 2:30. They can do it in their sleep, barely breathing when they come off the final set of pull-ups. Maybe it's time to ratchet it up a little bit. And so you're thinking this through, saying, all right, this guy's a real beast, or this lady's a real beast. She definitely should increase the weight on the thruster. But you know what else would make this really a lot harder is if we did bar muscle ups on top of that. And you know what would make it a lot harder also is if we doubled the reps. And so now you have this woman who is jumping the bar from 65 pounds to 95 pounds. She's doing double the reps, and she's doing bar muscle ups instead of pull-ups. Now that's an obviously extreme example.
Right.
And what you've created there is a totally different workout. And so that's a case where in the attempt to make this match her level, you've got something that is so far from the original that the utility is kind of out the window as well. Or at least the utility when compared to what you had planned for that day. That might be a good challenge for that athlete at some point later on down the road, but it's not appropriate if what you had on the books was Fran.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yep, for sure. And
so
and
one variable at a time if you choose to do it. That's my...
Yeah, the ways to play with it are almost infinite, right? I mean, if you had, going back to a Cindy example, you had some crazy athlete that was in the upper 20s on Cindy, which is astonishing, but they just almost can't move any faster. Make the pull-ups strict, great, make push-ups, hand release push-ups. Like you could find, something to do and maybe you do that and they're so amazing it didn't slow them down. Well, you got a data point to work. You don't have to get it perfectly right that time. They get in a tremendous workout. They're going to be fine. So it's all good. I really like the grace deal of let's either do 5s or open up with a big set and then see what happens.
Commit to a different strategy. And what's interesting about that is without fail, when you take that approach, people are less receptive to that than they are to let's say add an extra 30 pounds to the barbell because they know intrinsically that is harder and they know intrinsically that that's hitting them in the weak spot. And adding extra weight to the bar in the grace example, or just extending grace to 50 reps, for example, that's more palatable because in a sense, it's easier.
It gives you a reason to slow down.
Exactly. It's what they already expect, and it's playing to their strengths as it always has. And it gives you that opportunity, like you said, to break and say, well, of course, I'm going to 50 reps today, so I can take my foot off the gas a little bit because that is what is now expected.
And if you did that, maybe we'll close on this. If you did that example, athlete has a 3-minute grace, they've done quick singles to get there. Now they're going to open up with whatever, set of 10, the most they can touch and go, then do singles. And that causes them, let's say, to now get a 3-minute and 40-second grace compared to their 3-minute grace. That now also gives you the opportunity as the trainer or the coach to explain to that athlete that even though they are now really far off of their PR, whatever that would be, almost 30% slower, 25% slower, that doesn't, not to say that it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter. I mean, you still did a sub-4 grace. You got a little bit outside of your wheelhouse. You did 30 clean and jerks of a functional movement. You tested yourself. There was plenty of intensity there. The time is just one valuable metric to track. The time does not dictate whether or not that workout was a meaningful and beneficial workout. You did the 30 clean and jerks. Today's time on this variant was 3:40. That's it. That's all. It's a different metric than your other grace, and it's all good. So it's, give you something else to do as a coach.
Absolutely. Yeah. And hey, man, I just think that what a valuable physiological lesson. Can I empty the tank and hang on? Versus do I get to have my perfect pace, in perpetuity?
Yep. And people can play with this all the time, right? I mean, I don't want to make any broad brush sweeping generalizations, but I feel like it is one of my natural strengths to do that. And I just feel like, any workout that has a run, most CrossFitters don't give that the respect because they want to be the barbell hero or the pull-up hero. And so on almost any workout that you've done previously, you have the opportunity to experiment with it by now giving the run the respect it deserves, or the bike portion or the row portion, and ratchet that up a little bit. And it will feel like an entirely different workout. And that barbell that you used to think was light and you can throw around now feels a whole heck of a lot heavier, and it's getting broken up when it never used to get broken up. There's benefit there. There's a lot of benefit there, both physically and mentally, quite frankly. So, all right. I've went through my notes. Are you content? Are you happy?
I am satisfied with that. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So yeah, intended stimulus. It's a good thing to have a beat on, but don't get so precise about it that you lose sight of it or the utility in it. On the other end, don't be so far off base that you're just substituting random things. And scale up is rare. It's very, very rare. That's my encapsulation of the episode, Pat.
I almost sabotaged it. So I guess I might as well have, because it was a relatively simple question. I'm like, this is going to be a quick show. We're going to be off and on and off in 10 minutes.
We say that all the time, though.
So as always, we're answering Heidi's questions today. We love the questions from everybody. So whether you're watching or listening, we want to know what you feel or think. You can go to the Very Not Random Instagram, when we post snippets of the show there, leave some comments or questions there. You can go to this episode on the btwb YouTube channel, post your thoughts and comments there, especially about intended stimulus, or I'm sure a hot button could be, when do you think it's appropriate to scale up? We want to know. We don't have all the answers for sure. And more people chiming in is more learning. So as I always say, appreciate all of you. Want to help support the show? Check out programs.btwb.com/VNR. That link is also in the show notes. If you go to the YouTube channel, we got a bunch of cool stuff that we hope you find value in, from all kinds of gymnastics programs. There's barbell lifts, there's dumbbell and bodyweight on-ramps. Again, hopefully some stuff that helps folks out, and a lot of good time and effort went into those things. So that's it. We appreciate you. For Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we will see you next time.